Be honest, how many of you came here for the title? Diminuendo to fabric softener. I was just curious. That's fine. So, do any of you recognize what book this was taken from? I just left a little hint at the top there of the, no?
This
No.
one, it looks like one of the turn-of-the-century song collection, like Americana.
That's pretty warm. It's this book. It's the Fireside Book of Folk Songs. And when I was very young, I had this book. And I didn't read music, obviously, at that time. But I just was so enthralled with the book. And the images in this book really imprinted on my little childhood psyche. Not just the pictures that were so evocative, but think about a little child looking at those swirls and the smiles and all of the little dots and things. I was especially captivated by the Cocker Spaniels. Anybody see them yet?
Mm-hmm.
Anybody not see them yet? That's okay. We're going to zoom in. Does that help? and I had no idea what they were doing there. But I was the kind of kid, I wasn't much of a why kid, you know, and I just accepted things at that time. But I just figured adults put these cute little doggies, sprinkle them all through the book. There must be a good reason, and when I'm older, I'll find out why. And when I was older, and I mean this was years later, when I discovered that they were actually the sign for what? For sustaining pedal, that what they, what they then push the pedal down, that it was just actually fancy cursive, PED. I absolutely remember feeling a little betrayed and disappointed because the magic went out of it. It was, you just push your pedal down, whatever, it was sort of that. Children are compulsive meaning constructors, right? If they don't understand the meaning of something, they will create a meaning for it. Case in point. What do you see when you look at this?
Up and down heavy.
A smile.
No, you don't. You're music educators. What do you see when you look at that? Or what do we see?
Yeah.
We see the notes. We see staccato, right? Legato. What do kids see? Tell us.
Upside down heavy.
Right. They see smiley faces. And we know kids do this, right? We've seen them do this. And it's really sweet and it's kind of funny sometimes, but it also gives us valuable insight into how children think and how they process information, right? If we break down the process, it might look something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's subconscious. It's a subconscious stripping away of what doesn't make sense to you to find the little kernel that does make sense. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So in this case, coming up with a relatable image has nothing to do with what we might want them to learn, right? Smileys have nothing to do with staccato and legato. But we can use their natural process to actually come up with a way to teach something in a relatable way that will help them learn something. And that's kind of what this talk is all about. One of my favorite quotes is by one of my favorite educational visionaries, John Holt, from the 1960s. And he said, one of the things he said was, if you want to rescue a man stranded on an island, you must go to where he is. So finding a way to apply this process to teaching something new is really meeting the children where they are. So I came up with a device that in a way simulates this, that can actually find a relatable image, teach something new by means of a relatable image. So I would like you to meet my music imagery transformer. The idea of this machine is to find a relatable way of describing something new that we can use to bring the concept closer to the learner. So here's how it works. You take a musical term, and we'll do this with some actual musical terms in a minute, but I'll just describe it first. You take a musical term, you feed it into the machine. First thing that happens in the first space, the label gets erased. Whatever that term or symbol is, we erase it. Second space, what is actually happening? What is this thing doing? And I think this will clarify when we do it with an actual thing. This room, you add the fuel to the machine, which is the teacher's imagination, experience, sense of play, playfulness, and come up with something else that performs this function, or something like it. And then finally, the light bulb, you come up with a new description for this thing, and you extract a new image and you hand it to the child. And now we'll see how this actually also hands the child ownership and agency. Let's take the word dynamics. So we feed dynamics into the machine, right? What's the first step? What happens in the first space? Take away the word dynamics, very simple. So now, next one, what's actually happening? What do dynamics do?
Changes volume.
Say what?
Changes the volume.
Changes the volume. Can we expand the thinking of that? Another way to describe what dynamics actually,
A lot of the times.
what do we call that?
That's the volume or loudness knob.
The volume, loudness, what do kids call that sometimes?
The dial.
The dial, and what do they, how do they describe it instead of saying loud and soft? What's another word they use?
Dial it up.
Crank it up.
High and low, have you ever heard that?
Yeah.
You know, we try to not do that, but it is high and low. It's about high and low, right? So we just kind of try to come up, maybe up and down. Is that related? Up and down, something like that. And what I finally sort of thought about this, and it takes practice. It takes getting used to this idea, and then these images start to come quicker, right? But what I came up with was hills and valleys. Hills and valleys, the topography of sound, hills and valleys. And actually, the way I came up with this was by courtesy of my students, my second graders. I wanted to introduce them to dynamics. So I said, I'm going to sing a song 2 ways. I had my guitar. I said, I'm going to sing a song 2 ways. After you hear me sing the song the 2 ways, see if you can describe the difference between the 2 versions of the song I sang. So the first time I sang it with no dynamic change at all, and that's not easy, is it, right? Because it's not natural. I sang it as plain and flat as I could. The second time I did the natural dynamic variations. And the descriptions they came up with, somebody said the first one was flat and the second one had more shape. Somebody said, you know, the second one went high and low, and the first one didn't do anything. And somebody actually said, it sounded like in the second one you were going up and down mountains. And that was it, that was the click. And so from then on, I drew this in the moment, and from then on, I've used this image to help children understand the topography of sound, to understand hills and valleys. So just think about this for a second. The difference between teaching them the word dynamics to mean loud and soft, and teaching them the word hills and valleys to mean loud and soft. You get that, where I'm going with that? Yeah. It's a relatable image. It doesn't mean they are never going to learn the word dynamics, or that I don't use dynamics, and I have a disclaimer a little farther on in this presentation about that. It's not that. It's what is going to attach them to this concept more fully. Because think about the process. If you teach somebody the word dynamics, they have to memorize the word. They have to remember what it's supposed to attach to, because there's nothing organically that connects the word dynamics to getting louder and softer, if you've never heard the word before, right? Then you forget the word a few times, you forget what it's attached to. If you connect it with hills and valleys, for example, and by the way, there's no one right answer. Somebody says it's waves. She thought of the waves. You know, there are many ways to do it. But if you get the relatable image, it's instant. It's just much more efficient, right? Without all that forgetting and disassociating. Let's do another one. If you recognize the scale that I'm playing, you can call out the name of it, all right?
Whole tone.
Yes, this is the whole tone scale. I don't exactly remember the circumstance that this happened, but let's first feed it into the machine, okay? Does anybody need to hear that again? All right. Hi. So you feed whole tone into the machine. What happens in room 1? That's the easy part, right? You take off the label. Next one, what happens? What is it doing? And in this case, we can make use of music's natural feeling side by saying, how does it make you feel when you hear that? Actually, you could open or close your eyes, but I want to play this again and really try to say, what does this feel like? Could you find an adjective or what? How would you? Dreamy. You could misty, a little mysterious, whatever.
It
But
feels empty.
Empty.
There's notes missing, you know? Like in a regular scale, if you want to call it like that.
Right,
It's
but that's-
closer together.
that's definitely a musician's take on it. You
Yeah.
have to be a pretty advanced musician to know there are notes missing. So that's not a criticism, but it's an observation, right?
Well,
Right.
the kids are used to be with going up and down with their favorite character transforming to like a witch.
Yeah, and this is used, this is used to evoke dreams, and that's what I ended up calling it, was the dream scale. And I wanted to use this example because it's different from the dynamics example in that whole tone scale, how many humans, how many mere mortals ever get to learn what a whole tone scale is?
Us.
If they go to a music conservatory, honestly. You know, and it's a wonderful thing for a 7-year-old to discover this sound. And not only discover the sound, but discover that it's not that hard to play it. It's hard to play it like Rubinstein, but it's not hard to go C, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, C, you know? And I've done these things. Anybody here comfortable playing a whole tone scale? Good. It doesn't have to be in the key of C, because I'm not comfortable out of the key of C on the piano. But, so this is what I did. This is what I did with a student. I said, I taught him how to do it. He was interested in it. He might have told me he had a dream. I don't remember what happened, but I said, okay, I'm going to introduce your scale, your dream scale, we were calling it then, with a little introduction. Here we go. And after I introduce, you'll play it. That night, and we turned the lights down, of course. That night, the little boy went to bed and had the most amazing dream.
That's optional. Depends how you want to think
Difficult
of it.
student, yeah. But
Continue.
that was it.
Oh, I
That's
was
the
over
story.
it.
So you can, let's do it again.
Then that dream,
So
and
you
then,
can go on.
and then,
Yeah. Right, thank you. And all he did, this little guy, was he just did what I did because we were about the same level on the piano. And but you could just see his face light up like he was part of something. I mean, it's kind of a gift in a way. I was able to give him simply because I said I'm going to call it the dream scale, not the whole tone scale. At some point, I started maybe name dropping that into the conversation. Speaking of the sustaining pedal, this is just one more example I wanted to give before we go on a little. Sustaining pedal, right? I was with a guy, I do teach girls occasionally, but these happen to be boy stories. So I was with Max, and Max was looking at the piano, and he said, what is that pedal over there for? And I said, well, maybe you can figure it out if you do an experiment. So I said, here's what you do. We sat down at the piano. I said, pick any note, play the note, don't touch the pedal, don't go near it. Play the note, lift your finger, and listen, and see what happens. Then push the pedal down with your foot, hold it down, don't release it, push the same note, pick up your finger, and see what happens. So he did. And when he picked up his finger and the note kept going, his eyebrows went way up into his hair, and he said, the note survived. I said, yes, it did. Never occurred to me to describe it that way. I said, so what might you want to call that pedal? What do you think he said?
Survival pedal.
The survival pedal. The survival pedal. So this kid, it established a relationship between the human and the concept, right? Okay. Not only did this serve certain purposes like what I'm talking about, but it gets to my story. About agency and where this comes into the picture. So I was we were singing, do you know the song, The Tailor and the Mouse?
Sounds familiar.
It's a really wonderful, creepy, weird, funny, odd folk song. There was a tailor, had a mouse, hi diddle do come feed him. And the ending goes, hi diddle do come, hi diddle fee, o'er the town of Ramsey, hi diddle do come over the lea, hi diddle do come feed him. And you repeat the ending softer and softer and softer. And I wanted my third graders to experience this, how magical it is to fade out like that. And boy, were they trying to do it. They were furrowing their little eyebrows, and they were scrunching their faces, and the sound was staying exactly the same. Or I'd remind them, and they'd go, I'd say, don't forget, and they'd go, hi diddle do come. You know, there was no middle, right? It's not easy to do, to start loud and get right. It takes a lot of control, focus, concentration. Okay. So I decided I wanted to come up with an image that might help them. And I thought of things that make things softer. Fabric softener. This is what came to me. There are other things I could have used, popped into my mind. So I said, is there anybody here who's never heard of fabric softener? A couple of hands went up. I said, it's something you add to your laundry. And when you add a few drops of it, it actually makes the clothes get softer. So I said, suppose we add a few drops of fabric softener, just little by little, a few drops to the sound at the end. And after about the third try, it was very good. You know, we weren't ready for Carnegie Hall, but it was decent. It was a much better grasp of it. But this is when other things started to happen. Every time I'd say we're going to sing The Tailor and the Mouse, someone in the class would call out, don't forget the fabric softener. And when we would finish the song, they wanted to critique it. They'd raise their hand and say, you know, I think we didn't really add enough fabric softener. And someone would call out, no, we added enough, but we started too late.
Wow.
And they would discuss it, right? I had at least 2 parents at separate meetings say to me, now, I'm hearing something about fabric softener from Julia. Can you explain what that is? You know, so they were bringing this home, talking about it. One time we sang the song and I was thinking ahead, I wasn't being in the moment, and I was thinking about the next thing, and I kind of cut things short, and an irate 4th grader said, Meryl, you forgot the fabric softener, we should do it again. This is agency. This is agency. Caring so much about this that they wanted to come out right. And so this was just an additional thing. As great as that was, doing this in the classroom, even more amazing was discovering the kids were doing that when they weren't in the classroom. And I only want to read this out loud, not because you can't read, because I just love to read this out loud. Dear Meryl, it's an email I got from the father of one of my students. I don't know what you're doing with Charlie, but we can't get him to stop talking about music. He's constantly at the piano and loves showing us things. Yesterday, while he was strumming the auto harp, he said the F chord sounded green and the C7th is chocolate. Tonight he showed me how to make Twinkle Twinkle Little Star sound cross-eyed. What's going on? Bess, Michael, Charlie's dad. I get emails and phone calls from time to time telling me, you know, Sophie taught her mom how to play Sneaky on the piano. You know who Sneaky is on the piano? You know, your eyebrows have to be up for that. What's the name that music educators call it? What is that? The chromatic scale. But so Sophie taught her mom Sneaky. David's dad told me that David demonstrated Mary Had a Little Lamb with and without sauce. You know what sauce is? It's accompaniment, right? You put it through the machine, right? Take off accompaniment. What does it do? It goes with something. What goes with something? Sauce, okay? So here's my important clarification. I love words. I'm a writer, and I love musical terminology. I have nothing against musical terminology. I was a professional violinist for a very long time before I was a teacher, and there is an absolute time and a place for musical terminology. I was very happy to have it when I was playing professionally. I do, as I said, name drop these technical terms into the conversation. But I really believe that in terms of introducing an idea, if you want the idea to stick, when you have a term that's way out there, it's floating. There's nothing to attach it to, right? But if you call it sauce or you call it fabric softener, you know what this is, and it's like it reaches inside you and grabs a hooks onto something. So yeah, I think you've got that point, basically, right? I came up with many of these when I was teaching in a classroom. I taught at the Little Red Schoolhouse downtown. I taught at the Lower Lab School uptown. But I also came up with a number of them in my private music program, which is what I do now, which I call Music House. But the ones that I came up with in my private program seemed transferable to use with a class of 28 students. So there are more examples of this on my website, and you'll see that right under the lexicon. If you're curious, you can go there and take a look. Benefits of using relatable imagery, we've sort of covered it, right? It humanizes the process. It establishes a connection. It's efficient. It makes advanced concepts accessible so that they could become a tool in a child's toolbox. You know, the dream scale, the Alberti bass, chord inversions, no, chord flips. Chord flips, it's like leapfrog, right? So there are things that you can introduce that they don't have to wait to go to college or to a conservatory to learn. In this culture that we live in, there is a perception that pain is gain, right? That for learning to be valuable, it has to feel serious. Play gets lost a lot. The idea that something can be silly or funny or just making a connection, oh, well, that's not real learning, you know. I don't sense anybody here having an issue with that. And, you know, we could even say, does learning about really what I see as a very important concept, approach, does learning about that by way of a silly cartoon machine diminish the value of the concept? I think it's something to think about, and I think that that was addressed somewhat in the keynote, you know, to really reflect on your story about this, or our story, you know, when we think of this, if something's getting in the way, what is it that's getting in the way?
Right.
I almost always find some way to mention that, you know, when musicians do what you're doing, you know, professional musicians, they call it this. And I think of it as a seedling that I'm planting. If they're ready to absorb that, or if some future time they may need to know that, it's been mentioned. I'm not keeping a secret, you know, that these terms exist. I'm just not trying to use them to make the connection. There's a big difference. So basically, I'll just finish by saying, whether you came here for the title or whatever brought you to this session, you were just so nice, and I just so appreciate you coming and listening and contributing, and that's it. And we have time for questions. I would love questions about the private music program. I do, but you could ask any questions. If you don't ask, I'll tell, but anything? Yeah.
She just reminded me, I'm curious about the chords being green or chocolate. And
I was so hoping someone would ask me about that. When I was really little, I had an auto harp. And I think at the age of 4, I spent most of that year trying things out on the auto harp, as I recall. That's what I did. And it just had like 4 buttons. But I would just strum, and it was a magical thing. I didn't ask why, but I got a real sense of harmony and how chords sound and the juiciness of them. And I had this, I guess it's a little bit of synesthesia. I think there are degrees, you know, but that F chord sounded green to me. It was a green field. I could smell the grass when I played an F chord, you know. And I have an auto harp in my private program, in my music house programs. I think it's an incredible way for children and other humans to learn about harmony and chords. And you know, I'll say, all these chords, they have a 7 after them, C7, G7, F7. Yeah, I wonder if they have anything in common, you know. And you know, they'll strum the 7th chords, and I'll say, strum an F. And then strum an F7th and see if you feel something different. And they do, you know, you can tell. And I was like, well, you know, I've heard that as chocolate. It sounds chocolate to me. Mm-hmm. And from this, I've had kids come up with amazing imagery for various things. It might not be chocolate, it might be a smell of something, or you know, it's an extension of this. It's a little bit different, but it's coming up with how you feel something rather than how you intellectualize it or describe it, or say, well, if an F chord has a B flat in it, well, but it also sounds like chocolate, or you know what I mean? It's just, it is a good connector, I think, for things like that. I do sauce and the accompaniment in addition to sauce, which is a block chord, you know. Do sprinkles. Yeah. I have so much more to say, but I'd love to catch you just casually. I'd like to tell you more about this music house program I do. It's really been a laboratory I've been running about music learning for 20 years. I have a website about it. I have a newsletter about it. So if any of you would like to catch me, I'd like to have any kinds of private conversations, because we're over time now. But namaste. Thank you so much.